The US was like, AI is bad, it's going to take all our jobs, we're all going to get killed, it's going to be Armageddon. China's perception is this is great, this drives our productivity, we should be, we should embrace it. They want it to happen. So that means that they're going to implement it. People will download apps. When you're downloading an AI app, you are trading your privacy. You're giving data to train models, right? If they don't tell you that,
that's a deal.
It's a deal. That's the deal.
Yeah.
You should know that's the deal. If you don't know it, sorry, that's on you, right? I did a deck 8 years ago around that, why this is the Asian century.
It was a big shock for like the entire world, basically, where everybody was seeing, okay, China is doing something really great.
So, Tech.
Hello, welcome.
Hey.
Thank you for having me here.
Yeah,
Thank
welcome.
you for being here.
Welcome. So, a couple of years ago, you were still at the US Army as an engineer, and now you're sitting in Shenzhen in our podcast.
Yeah, that's right. What a big change.
What a journey.
Yeah, that's right.
So, tell us a little bit, how did it start, like you being in the US Army?
Yeah. So essentially, it was actually my first job outside after the university. Well, actually, first before I come out, thank you again for having me. I know it took a little bit for us to arrange the times. The first time around, I was like, yeah, that's a little bit further away from city center. So
It is.
So I was like, maybe I need to stack this in the first thing of the day I need to do. That way, I do this and then figure out where I'm going to be in Shenzhen. So thank you for being patient. Wonderful place, wonderful kind of podcast studio. It's visually very, very nice. For the listeners, there's like 3 lights and it's very professional here. So yeah, so I started off my career in the United States Army. I was an engineer after college. So went to the University of Chicago, studied economics with some really brilliant minds, but I felt everything was very academic. And I am slightly older. So I joined actually when the Iraq war started. And so I was like, everything's 2003, correct. Yeah, 2003. Okay. So the war started and I was like, well, I want to do something that was globally interesting. I didn't want to just go into a bank. And I felt that was the most important thing around the time. And then, signed up and joined the United States Army. And they sent me, instead of Iraq, they sent me to Korea, which they were basically the only 2 places that they would send you. So I had a bunch of guys that went to the sandbox, which was Iraq. And then they sent the other kind of crew or the other kind of big contingent over to Korea, which is still actually technically in war. The Korean War officially never ended. It's still, I think it's considered officially a truce.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I was there 2.5 years. I met my wife there, so I got something out of it.
And better food than in Iraq.
Yeah, exactly. Better food, better culture. So that's kind of what I did.
How long did you stay there in Korea?
I was in Korea for about 2.5 years. So I think my contract was like 2 years, and then I extended it for a little bit in Korea. The rest of my time in Korea, they sent me back to the US to get, I think the term was to get ETS'd out. So I just did my offboarding and everything in the US, and then I left.
Okay, and then you started working in the US as well.
That's right. Yeah. So then I continued on. I was a defense contractor for about 2.5, 3 years. So I was a consultant for the defense industry in Washington, D.C., Virginia. Whenever anyone says Washington, D.C., they live in, it's a lie. They probably live, unless they're a politician, they live in Virginia or Maryland. So I was in Virginia for the longest time. I worked for 2 firms, something called Barron Point and Booz Allen Hamilton. So I consulted on defense for 2.5 years. And then I said I didn't want to be part of defense anymore, which can be a good or bad thing. It's a very small industry, it's a big industry, but it's very closed, as you can probably imagine. So a lot of people went to West Point or Naval Academy in order to get up. I didn't go to any of the 2, so I said I have a cap. Also didn't have my I did have my U.S. citizenship, but I was too complicated because my wife's Korean, from Hong Kong originally, and so it's very difficult to rise up politically there. So I said, nope, I have to have an international career. That's when I went to London for business school. So I said I need to go internationally. I want to go to business school in a different location, like Europe. I've always liked Harry Potter. No, I don't. Harry Potter shit. I like James Bond. Can we can't curse on this podcast? Right?
We can.
You
we
can-
Oh,
can.
yeah,
you
is
can
it
do whatever
okay?
you.
Yeah.
Just
I
to
mean,
make sure.
you will get cancelled, not we.
Exactly. Maybe if we speak German, Scheiße. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
so no one can notice that. Yeah. So I was in London for 2.5 years. 2 years during the MBA. Loved Europe. Loved my time there. It's a great time to be in Europe back then. The tech scene was starting. So I did a startup after my MBA. I'm just gonna cover my entire career, and then it might be a little bit easier, save you from
Yeah.
asking questions. So I did a startup a little bit, failed spectacularly, didn't go well. So I said maybe I'll make for a better investor. So I joined Techstars in London. That was their first international office and first European office. So I did that for about 2.5 years. Invested in I think with Techstars invested probably about 50, 60 startups across Europe.
Startups, basically AI stuff. Kind of.
It was too early for AI, so
okay.
basically,
When
kind
was
of for
that?
tech. That was 2011,
Oh.
2013.
Oh, okay.
2013. German startups we didn't really invest in, but I went. We did, but I didn't. But primarily I focus on kind of Eastern Europe. I went to Belarus. I went to Romania a lot. I went to Armenia a lot. I went to Scandinavia a lot. I saw like Estonia, right? So there were lots of very interesting things there. Berlin was great for the coffee shops and the raves
The raves.
and the currywursts.
Yeah.
I remember those.
Yeah. Estonia is a very, very interesting country. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I was. That's why I think I was always interested in kind of the edge, right, as a personality, but also kind of my experience investing as well. Because even back then, the best stars would go to London, and then Germany, and then France would actually have great startups as well. But then, if you wanted to be early, if you didn't want to overpay, but also like we were extremely early stage, we're very comfortable with being early stage. We wanted to get them before they go to London, before they go to France, before they go to Germany. And so that meant we have to go to Eastern Europe. We have to go to the source. And so I got to experience that a lot and really enjoy that because I think that's really where the raw talent happens. And Eastern Europe, in Estonia, as much as they like to consider themselves as Nordics. I don't know if you knew that, but if you go to the Estonia airport, like all their design is like Nordic, and I was like, I don't know about that. I don't know what my Swedish friends think. And you guys Europeans, they're not quite Nordic, right? They're more Eastern.
I get the point.
Yeah, they're more Eastern. But I think that's the thing. They've got all the bits of the Eastern bit, right? Which is the analytical, the structured thinking that the Soviet gave them.
I mean, it's a good thing.
It's a fantastic thing.
We have Eastern European background.
Oh, right.
So
right.
Yeah. So it's like I think, but we are German, so we both were born in Germany, but our parents are like kind of immigrants from. So my parents lived in the Soviet Union.
All right.
And his parents in Poland.
Poland, yeah.
Oh, Poland.
Yeah.
But where in the Soviet Union?
In Kazakhstan. What's Kazakhstan now? Yeah.
Oh,
but they
Kazakh.
were like it's a long story. So there were German communities in the Soviet Union, in the different countries of the Soviet Union.
Okay.
And my parents and all my brothers and sisters were born in what is now Kazakhstan.
Oh, wow. Well, we have some Kazakh neighbors.
Okay, yeah.
Horse guys.
Yeah. So they were not Kazakh. They didn't have the Kazakh lifestyle.
Right.
But my mom also cooked some Kazakh food at home. And so
the
on.
bread.
And,
what was it? The
the
dumplings?
noodles, dumplings, yeah.
Wait, why were the German communities in?
Oh, long story. It was like the grandparents of my grandparents moved from Germany to Ukraine first, and then further east, and then in the 90s, most of them moved back to Germany.
I didn't know that. Yeah. But so it's interesting. It is. I think Eastern Europe. It's more structured, obviously because of the Soviet kind of style, and then also they're more open.
Oh yeah, they're extremely open and also entrepreneurial friendly, which is something you wouldn't really know if you're not.
I think because they're hungry, because they didn't see it. So like the Estonians are kind of like that, but if you like the Romanians, Armenians, I didn't really go to Kazakhstan, so I don't know, but Belarus is also a little bit different. Because it's still pretty, like,
I mean, there are great people in all of these countries.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So we also have, like, some friends who open offices in Kazakhstan now.
Yeah.
And then we have, we met people from Romania and Hungary here in Shenzhen.
Yeah.
So
I've also worked with a lot of Romanians together in my previous company, in my team. So like these are great people.
Fantastic. Yeah. Into your they're more open, they're more entrepreneurial. I think they're hungrier.
Yeah.
And then because of the internet, then they know everything about the world and whether they're well traveled or not, depending on the passport, but still they're open conceptually and ideologically and theoretically. So I've really enjoyed kind of my time there because I thought, and then they had, what does that mean for an investor? What it means is, one, they're hungry, right? They came from nothing, so they were ideas on how to do things, right? They're not fixed on like, oh, this is the way to do it. This is the American style of doing it. This is the Western Europe style of doing it. We're interested in trying something different, and this doesn't quite work, or this model doesn't quite work where we are. I was like, okay, that's pretty. Like that thinking was new.
That's the Eastern thinking, I would say. Like also China is going the pragmatic way, rather we just try. We're very open to new ideas, and I've heard, okay, this is great, let's try it. And then see how it goes, and then along the way we just either pivot or see how we figure it out, right?
That's a really good point. It's the pragmatism. It's like, it works, so that's not
plan
to the Swedish.
plan.
It's like we gotta have a meeting about the meeting about and we have to have consensus
but let's do the meeting in 3 months.
No, I love the Swedes, but still that's a very particular style, right? Of really we have to come together and have consensus before we move on and stuff. And anyway, so I really enjoyed my time in there, and then afterwards I said, time to move to Asia. So at that time, my
why
daughter,
that? Tell us
so my
about the
daughter
reasons.
was born in London. So Vera Nora was born in London, but it was entirely for health reasons. So she had eczema, so her skin was too dry. The waters in the UK were just too dry for her skin, and so we said, and then my wife was stressing out, and it was very simple for me. I was like, look, I mean, if my wife is stressing out, this is not something that can be treated with just drugs. It'll probably fuck her up for the long term. The simple solution is to move, right? Because the last thing I need is a stressed out, young mom, first time mom, right? Because if I don't solve that situation, I don't even have a career, right? Because I need to. It starts with home, right? It starts with home. It starts with home first, and especially your family. So I said, we're going to move. So I said, quit, move to Hong Kong, because I'm originally from Hong Kong. And I said, my wife's half Korean. So Hong Kong's the easiest. We've got all the visas and everything. And moved to Hong Kong 11 years ago. So that's how old my daughter is. So then in Hong Kong, I was like, what do we do? What do I do? I knew accelerators from Techstars, and then AI was starting to become big in the UK. The smartest people that I knew in the UK were doing AI, right? So Demis from DeepMind, Nathan actually from Airstreet Capital, he was starting, Jan Tallinn from Skype. So there were really, really smart guys doing AI, and then I literally just thought, let's focus on AI. It makes the most sense in terms of the technological leap. And let's focus on that. So 10 years ago, I started the first AI accelerator. We invested in about 50 companies, focused on AI, primarily in the Asian region. We had some companies from Europe and Africa, but mostly here in Asia. So Korea, South Korea, China, Southeast Asia, Vietnam, and Australia, one or two. And then, they did pretty well. Some startups invested by Korean Development Bank, Sequoia, Horizons Ventures, which is the largest family office in Hong Kong. And then, so led me to here and, Asia. So I'm all in Asia.
That's actually very interesting, because at that time, 2017, right? When you started it, most of the money still went to Silicon Valley.
Sure.
And a lot of people and funds and investors didn't even think about Asia, but you at that time already had it on your radar. So what was the one thing that made you confident about Asia?
That's a great question, and I think the money is still, to your point, the money is still in Silicon Valley. The valuations are still there. At that time, you could argue Southeast Asia. So I had some offers and discussions with funds in Southeast Asia, but I just never felt I had the edge in Southeast Asia. I'm not Southeast Asian. I can intellectually understand it, but I'm ultimately Hong Kong Chinese, right? Like I have no edge in Southeast Asia. So the money is still in the Valley, most of it. But I think if you take a look at, for me, I actually built a deck about that, for investors. So I think it was guns, germs, and steel that basically kind of elucidated, I think, the trend. So basically, in order for the GDP to grow, there's only a few things that can happen. Primarily, it's population that drives most of it. Technology can amplify people, right, and their productivity, but there's no better replacement for growth than the number of people. And he was taking a look at a longitudinal study of human civilization, right? So Industrial Revolution, I think, kind of changed it a little bit. That technological component was much greater. And then there was also a discrepancy of those that actually use technology and countries that didn't. But if you take along the span of the entire thing, it really is human population that makes the biggest difference. So then I started thinking, okay, human population, obviously, China and India, Asia as a whole, let's just say, takes the cake there. I think in terms of gap, there was always this thing, right? Opportunity is available anywhere, but just not equally distributed. And if you take a look at the know-how across the world, the know-how as a collective human thing, there's a lot of knowledge. But I think whether it's implemented equally in the US and equally in China, I don't think that's the case. Probably in China, there's probably there's potential, versus in the US, it's always leading, but it's only 300 million. In China, there's still both the population and there's a gap they have to go. So the US can innovate all they want, but then that just leaves a big gap, I think, of implementation and execution in China. So that was the second factor. And then the third factor was really, I think the view on AI. So there's a study, and I haven't seen this paper in a while, but someone did a comparative study between, and I'm sorry to be academic, but that's kind of my background. I'm a Chicago guy. We tend to like to, like academia. There's a study that basically said, okay, what are people's perceptions, comparing US and Chinese perceptions of AI? But the US was like, AI is bad. It's going to take all our jobs. We're all going to get killed. It's going to be Armageddon. China's perception is, this is great. This drives our productivity. We should be, we should embrace it. It was both like interesting. What are your positive opinions? And, US is less and China is more. And then it also asked the counter opposite, which is like the negative. Like, are you negative about it? And the Chinese were like, no, we're not negative. And the US are like, definitely super negative about it. So I was like, okay, people's perception of AI is also better in China, right? So they want it to happen. So that means that they're going to implement it. People will download apps, because ultimately, when you're downloading an AI app, you are trading your privacy. You're giving data to train models, right? That is, the if they don't tell you that,
yeah, that's the deal.
It's a deal. That's the deal.
Yeah.
You should know that's the deal. If you don't know it, sorry, that's on you, right? But if you believe that ultimately is a good thing, you'll do it, right? And so I think that positivity, made a lot more sense to me and the perception. That's why I think for me it was much made sense in China. And again, I did a deck 8 years ago around that, why this is the Asian century. And yeah,
that's interesting that you were this early, because I thought
too early sometimes.
Yeah, because I thought, okay, people in China really opened up and become very, very open to AI and what's going on when DeepSeek came out, because then it was like, okay, open source, everybody's contributing to it, and we want to make something happen. We don't have the fundings and everything that OpenAI had, right? So we just open it up and see how we can build something out of it. And obviously it was a big shock for the entire world, basically, where everybody was seeing, okay, China is doing something really great. And then the open source model became extremely popular in China, right?
Right.
It's very interesting that you saw this already in 2017.
No, but to
With
your
the
point,
factors, it makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, but to your point, I was waiting for that too because I was like, I've got this theory, I present it to investors, but I don't know until something validates it. I'm just a crazy guy thinking that AI is gonna,
Mm.
And so when DeepSeek happened, I was like, okay, this is the moment that that I didn't predict that moment, but I was like, it validates a lot of kind of the work and my hypothesis. So
Yeah, and everybody was proud
it was,
that is
yeah.
happening from China.
But then that was also kind of a bit of an anomaly as well, because I know some of DeepSeek. So the founder of DeepSeek, he has a hedge fund, right, essentially, and so he bought the GPUs. At some point, he had the China's largest inventory of NVIDIA. I don't know whether it was like H200s, but GPUs for his hedge fund to train and model and to perform better for his hedge fund. And I don't know what happened, but it was like, I think it worked. I mean, he made enough money on the hedge fund, but he was like, okay, we can do something with this model, with these GPUs, and he made the model. So to some degree, it was an anomaly it was a side hustle to some degree. An AI model is a side hustle, but it's also good fortune, and maybe that's what it requires sometimes, right? A stroke of luck for that to happen. So it was, to your point, I think it was really, really good. Yeah, I should talk about DeepSeek a little bit more too.
So you said the approach of Chinese customers or private persons is different than in the US. So how did you see it with startups and startup founders?
Good question.
How's their approach to life and business? How different is it from the US?
Yeah, I think what I've noticed, I think on the privacy level, it's more willingness to give up the privacy data. So like in Europe, right, you've got GDPR, right? And whether you like GDPR or not, it exists, right? And so it just makes, are you willing to give up your data to the big corporates like Google and stuff, and are you willing or you're not willing to do it? Here, it's kind of a given, sure, why not, right? Doesn't really matter. And so I think it's just that alignment and difference in thinking about privacy and your data, right? I think it's different. And because of even that philosophical change, that's a big difference on the AI models, because then you can use that data to train, right? And whether it's like a health startup, right, and using your health records to train a model, or even something as simple as, I don't know, maybe a coffee app, that you take pictures of yourself and your coffee, or even a sense time, right, with face tracking, and them training models on your face and facial structure. I think the Chinese population is much less opinionated and concerned about that privacy issue. I think if you were to use health data records in Germany, or I know in the UK, people would be up in arms. Like even for Palantir now going to the NHS, right? People are like, it's big Palantir, right? It's my records. What are they going to do with it? That type of thing. So I think that's one thing. I think that difference.
So my question was more about the entrepreneurs, like the startups. How is their approach different from the ones in Scandinavia or in the Baltic countries?
We talked about that before. I think Chinese people are a lot more pragmatic, right? So I think, I wouldn't say they enjoy working. I don't think it's like, I think if they had a choice, they wouldn't do the 996. But I think it's they're much more pragmatic, and so they're willing to do 996 to make the money to live, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think they're just much more pragmatic about it and just get shit done. I'm gonna offend some European friends, but European friends, I remember in the summer, in the summertime, all right, where are they gonna go? Are they gonna go to Santorini? Are they going to Ibiza? Are they go to south of France? Right? You always and then during the winter, is it Cochemel? Is it, I don't know. Where in the Alps are they skiing? On the Italian side or the French side or the German side, right? But here, I don't see that conversation as much. I'm not saying one is good or the other, but I think it's just that culture is different. And I think those are some of the kind of that work culture, I think, is different, and that pragmatism, I think, is extremely different.
That's basically for China, right? But you also invest in startups all over Southeast Asia, right? Is it also similar, the mentality in the other countries?
I think Vietnam. I was really, really like impressed about Vietnam. So I really like Vietnam because of that. I think it's funny they've also got that Eastern, communism type of mentality. I wouldn't even say it's like Europe. I just think it's more the fact that they didn't, catch up or rise, on that first wave. So they're much more, that gap is bigger now, right? They've seen everything on the internet and they're like, we want to do it too. So it's not a communism thing. I think it's just the stage in development. But Vietnam, I think, is very interesting. I think they've got that really kind of hustle as well. That impresses me, I think, in Southeast Asia. Indonesia, I've heard as well in terms of size.
Yeah.
But in terms of the people, we were not fortunate enough to invest in any Indonesian founders.
You had some successful investor stories, some one IPO, I think, 2 acquisitions, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And what were some wrong predictions you made, or some
I
failures?
don't have too many wrong predictions, but I have plenty of failures. I generally kind of think long and hard about kind of things, but failures, I think in terms, I don't like to talk about failures in terms of like other startups because, look, being a founder is this tough, right? And there's many different reasons why something failed, and it's not for me to judge that and their story and what happened, because I might have a view and that might be not the truth or the truth. I think for me, I'll talk about my own personal failures. The raising capital, I think, is always very difficult. But I would say, to your point earlier about money, I think raising capital here in Asia is difficult because we're not the Valley. And so I think, and it's not just raising money, but there's a lot of things that I did when I first came to Asia that I used kind of a Western way of doing things to do, and I tried to fit them into Asia, and it didn't quite work. It's raising capital, it's leadership, it's management, it's even raising kids to some degree. And so for me, 10 years, 11 years in, even though I'm Chinese, right? Even though I'm Asian, even though I was born in Hong Kong, I still had to unfuck myself to some degree, right? I had to learn a new way. And I think I feel much more integrated now in a Western way of doing things, but also something that fits an Asian way. And it's funny, like, you speak very good Chinese. I didn't hear enough. You might be very good too, but I feel like it's funny. Hong Kong, to some degree, sometimes China feels alien to us Hong Kong people, and you might wonder why. It's because Hong Kong left. So the people that left China came to Hong Kong. We were very, very separate, and so oftentimes just seeing Chinese development is very alien and also scary because to some degree they moved on from that historical legacy and became a modern country. Sometimes Hong Kong's too traditional. We're still like stuck. You know how it is. Immigrants are sometimes like even more traditional than the local people, right?
Yeah.
Because they hang on to the customs.
Yeah.
They're like, we're hardcore Irish, right? We'll always keep our Irish ways. But then the Ireland guys are like, we've moved on from that. Like, we don't do whatever, right? Kilts and whatever. We don't kill people with axes. So I think that's Hong Kong. Hong Kong, we're very traditional custom-wise. And so having to come back, realizing how mainland China is, the customs, I've had to marry that with my Western ways and also my Chinese ways, my Hong Kong ways. Now I feel much more comfortable doing business in China. Before, when I first came back, I was just like, it's not even scary. Well, it's a little bit scary, but I was just like, I don't even know where to start. So I think that's my biggest failure, and I'm still kind of reconciling that and trying to improve that.
But you somehow managed to get along. So what is the big difference now in like raising money here? You said this is one of the hardest parts.
Yeah, I think it's I think if it's a very specific question, how to raise money, I think now, because raising money is always like, it's not a trick, but it moves all the time. I think now it's about, do you want money in renminbi? Do you want US dollars? If it's RMB, who has the money? It's usually kind of the governments, and you have to play with that. If you want USD, private individuals, probably it's the Chinese money that have moved out. Is it Hong Kong then or Singapore? How do you talk to them? What do they want? Because what they want is very different from Western investors, right? And Western venture investors are a little bit more long term. Chinese money is actually a lot more short term. So you have to balance that, which is this is one of the actually points, because Hong Kong money is to some degree a little bit longer term than Hong Kong Chinese, because of the development. I'm not saying it's a philosophy; it's a development, thing. Because Hong Kong had, after British rule, had 2 or 3 generations that they preserve wealth, and so they were a little bit more long term in thinking. China is only first generation to get wealthy, maybe second, let's just say 1 or 2. So it's a little bit less long term. And so, to answer your question, it's more like trying to figure out the incentives and what people want, and trying to understand those incentives, and provide a package that both marries what I want, but also the incentives that matter to them. And look, and they are very, very different, because in a venture scenario, it's a long-term investment. I cannot guarantee an outcome as much as I want to. And I like to be intellectually honest. I'll do my damnedest to make sure you've got a return, and a great return. But also intellectually, there is a chance that there's not, right? And so it's making sure that I message it correctly to LPs and provide that trust, but marrying the interests and the incentives that they want to pursue as well.
You just said it's very hard to raise money. So from your point of view, with what kind of product or what kind of service can you offer now to investors that it makes it easy to raise money?
I can only speak to kind of as a venture investor. I think it's again, I can speak to what I can speak to now, again, because raising money is always a game, and it varies depending, especially now, geopolitics being as fluid as they are. For now, kind of what is top of mind is how to capture some of that crypto wealth. So in Asia, there's a lot of crypto wealth that is there, and how to capitalize crypto wealth to some degree, but again, reconciling that short-termism with long-term investment. It's about how to couch that long-term investment into, with a fund, it could be a 7+3, right? So you have a 7-year fund, and then next 3 years after that, we're trying to get an exit. So it could be couching that, instead of a long-term investment, it's a ecosystem play, right? So we're trying to build the ecosystem around you or for you, or something around that, right? Because look, not only could they trade crypto as a lot more liquid, they could also put it in the bank, because the interest rates are high these days, right? So it's kind of maybe coming up with ideas that are a little bit more larger. And then I think the third piece is working with governments more. So for us, we are working with governments to raise funds, because they are longer term. They are sufficiently motivated to think long term and to build an ecosystem. Yeah. So those are kind of the 3 variations or thoughts about raising money, especially in a venture fund now.
How do the requirements differ from a government to
a private individual?
Very,
very different. So we've never done it before, which again is one of my biases coming in. I was like, because in the US, raising money from governments, nobody does that, and so I remember the Americans going to Europe. They were like, we don't want to work with governments. Fuck the government. But then I was like, in Europe, I was like, that doesn't make sense, because the government does play a larger part in Europe. And I think, and to be fair, it actually plays a larger part than we imagine it to. So to answer your question directly first, they're longer term. You have to find, the ecosystem development. You have to be a lot more patient. You can't just say, hey, I need the close money now, right? Or tomorrow. I needed the money yesterday, right? It doesn't work that way. They've got their long-termness. You have to understand they have a process, right? They have a process because they don't want to be unfair, right? So if you give me, let's say you're a government worker, you give me money, then it looks like we're best buddies. Even though we could be buddies, we can't look like we're buddies, right? It looks like we have to have a process. So the process really matters a lot. I think that's the biggest difference. Returns matter, but they're not the everything, right? They're not the single criteria. It's the ecosystem development. Are you here for the long term? Do you want to be here for the long term? Are you doing things like podcasts, right? In a city, are you trying to promote the city as well, right? So I think that those are kind of important as well. So it's everything around, I think, the returns and the relationship with the government. That's key. And to go back to, and now that I answer your question directly, I do want to kind of go back to that bias of the government. So for a long time, the U.S. is saying, screw governments, we're private entrepreneurs. That's just a myth. The U.S. likes to have narratives about the lone hero saving the situation, gets the girl, kisses the girl, that type of thing. But if you take a look at venture capital and the tech ecosystem, it was actually brought up a lot by the United States government and DARPA. California State actually helped a lot. So it's not an anomaly. The state does play a large role. Institutions play a huge role for a tech ecosystem, and it's absolutely necessary. It's just the narrative in the U.S. sometimes is skewed towards the private individual hero and the entrepreneur, but that's not true in the United States. And if you take a look globally as well, that's not true as well.
So let's talk a little bit about AI in Asia. It's like a big hype. We had DeepSeek. We had now recently OpenClaw. Everyone is so excited about it here in Asia. But is it just a hype, or is it actually something worth having a look at, investing money at, because especially in the LLM world, everything moves so fast. So
100%.
last year, DeepSeek was a number one. Wow, they can do the same like ChatGPT, but in with much lower cost.
Right.
And now I feel like this year, not so many people.
Minimax, all these kind of
That's right.
companies
and
are
people are not talking about DeepSeek as much as they did last year.
Yep.
How do you evaluate this whole situation?
Great question, and I think intellectually I can't know, because it's just to some degree I can't know, because it's really hard to anticipate. I mean, I run a newsletter, called The Automated. We have 13,000 subscribers daily. We've done it this is also about 3 years as well. And I remember early in the days, I'm like, should we write about AI? It's like daily. Is there enough news daily? Like, I don't know. In 2 months, I mean, and I've been in AI for a while, right? So I was like, really? Is there enough? And my team was like, yeah, there's enough content. We can write about stuff every single day. And I was like, really? And 3 years later, we're still writing stuff every single day. So I answered that question, yes or no. I think the no part, let's go there first, is, sorry, yes, is it a bit hype? Is it a big hype? Yes. It's definitely hyped up. There's definitely, part of it is it's the companies trying to raise capital, right? So it's in their interest to trying to do that. I think there's also less competing narratives of what's going on. So crypto is no longer there. I think there's also geopolitics come into play, because, you can compare China and the US with AI. So there's something interesting there. There's a narrative. But on the other hand, I think there's a lot of room to grow for AI. I think what I'm really interested in is the application side. And this is where actually China competes extremely well. I was at an AI governance summit this past weekend, right? So there were academics talking about how AI should be governed, right? Who governs it? Who should govern it? Who governs it? Who should govern it? And then what countries should play a part in governing it? So you had Indian guys, Chinese guys, American guys, all coming to and discuss. And it was a great kind of point. And there was one Chinese guy, from Tsinghua, Dean Xue. He was basically saying, the U.S. are very good at models, theory, but the Chinese are these are Chinese, right? So extremely good at the application level. And that accords with everything I've seen. He was approaching from a policy level. But what we've seen, with our friend at Robo 2.0, right, at Robo X, in terms of robots and humanoids, I was at the hackathon. I covered that on my show, and they were just doing stuff with like claws. So it's not just full humanoids, but partial hardware. So I think there's still a lot of legs in terms of the applications, and I'm very, very excited to see that and to see where it kind of goes. And I think there's a lot more innovation there actually, and I think they'll continue to be. I think what we'll start to see, actually, if I may, I'll talk about the two funds that I'm looking to raise. So there's two funds that we're raising right now. They're both called Computational Culture. One is focused on media and entertainment, and the other one is in space. So I think if you ask me, ultimately, what trends and thrusts, I think those are the two. So I think media and entertainment. Why? Because I think one, everyone's going to be a content creator somehow, some way, and we're doing media here because in the age of AI, I think it's so much easier to create content, right? Whether it's your own avatar, whether it's an email, right, that an AI writes, it's so much easier. So I think there will be a lot more people doing it. But then the people that will be doing live in human content, I think will be more of a premium because you see a lot of AI slop. People see a lot of AI slop, but they're willing to pay for the human stuff because that's the real stuff. If you take a look at concerts and entertainment artists, that's the evolution. Back then, you paid for CDs and LPs and that type of thing. Now that's gone away. So that's all for free, but you pay for the concerts. You pay for the merch, right? You pay for the human touch.
Yeah, I always people are so afraid of AI artists, but I always think it will be part of the business. And I actually, on my Spotify playlist, I have some AI songs there, and I think it's not bad. But I will never be, or people will never be hardcore fans of these AI. They just think this song is nice. But if you want to be a hardcore fan of a group, you are, because they have this rock and roll lifestyle, because they do drugs, they have some scandals, they have, and this is the human touch. This is why people like to be fans of people. If you're too perfect, you don't have any scandals, divorce, break up, people will never be hardcore fans of you.
Right. Right.
So I think there's place for everything in the future.
I agree. So like let's say this, right? We will have avatars in the AI age, which we're kind of going to. We'll have avatars doing these podcasts, but then I see a future age where basically we'll have fans outside watching us doing a live one. They'll pay tickets. I mean, you start to see that anyway, right? You have podcast shows, right?
Yeah.
They will pay to see the micro. Oh, he's drinking coffee. This coffee is good. Must be good, right? Like, oh, let's have his signatures. Let's interact.
Yeah.
You pay for the interaction and the crap outside of just the content itself. The content will be given away for free to get you in, and then you pay more for that interaction, right? Again, we saw that with artists. I think we'll see that for pretty much anybody, right, in the future. So I media entertainment, I think that's an interesting thrust and where we're going to get to. And then space, I think, is very, very interesting as well, because it's equally as broad in terms of application, right? So in space, you can have humanoids, right? You can have humanoids. You can have science. You can have material science, right? You have materials that go into space and insulate you and keep you warm. You have obviously science and medicine, right, to keep you healthy and keep you strong. As you go into space, it also includes food science as well. And then there's also a huge data component, right? SAS and data component to space as well. Just because space is really, there are kind of startups that are actually about satellites that will provide Wi-Fi. Starlink provide Wi-Fi right from space. So space as a trend is sufficiently broad, and that surface area intersects quite well with AI as well. And so those are the two areas that I think is pretty interesting.
You're also talking about fertility.
I did.
Right?
Yeah, I invested. I advised in a startup in the fertility space.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you want to know more?
Yeah, I want to know more. Because we have a big crisis in parts of this world, like in Europe for sure. It's like all the developed countries, they all have the same problem. South Korea is getting
huge.
I mean, your wife is half
Correct.
South Korean, so
Correct.
you did your job. right?
Yep. Yeah, I did.
Oh,
Not
she
enough
did.
too.
She
But
did
sorry,
her
sorry,
job.
yes,
She
of
did her
course.
job. Yeah.
Just 2 kids. We need more.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I don't have anything. I don't have any kids. So yeah, talk us through this topic.
Yeah, so the startup is called Kudum. It's a startup based. The scientific team is actually based out of Chengdu, and they have a strong collaboration with Sichuan University in Chengdu. And essentially, it's pretty simple. In order to test your sperm, right? Traditionally, you had to go to the hospital. You had to,
I did that before.
have you? Oh,
Yeah,
really?
yeah,
Did you?
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
What? Are you married? Are you looking at?
Yeah. So no. So I was married,
Ah,
and
right.
I did it like it in Germany and in China. So it's
right.
like you go there and then you
kind of look sheepishly.
yeah
You go to the
yeah.
bathroom.
It's not a bathroom. They have like dedicated small rooms.
Oh,
and then,
jeez. You try to flip through some
Yeah,
material.
they have a TV. They have a TV
They have
there.
a TV.
Yeah, they have a TV there
with content.
with content. Yeah, it's just like it's
In
very
China?
yeah, it's very interesting in China. It's like soft porn.
Yeah, I
It's
can
like-
imagine. Yeah.
So it's like
but German soft porn is much better than.
yeah, I think in Germany you just take your phone. Like in
Okay.
Germany, there's no
I remember,
TV. So
I remember
it's-
German advertisements at like
Yeah.
10 p.m. are fantastic.
Yeah, I mean Germany is quite open. Like you can
Yeah.
see like this very 18 plus NSFW scenes
yes.
in TV.
I know,
on,
I
on
remember.
Public, so
And 10 p.m.
Yeah.
Call whatever number. Slide.
oh
Six, six, six.
yeah. So so this is you were talking about the process.
Sure,
So
yes,
yeah,
of course.
like you go there as a and then you do your job.
You do your job, and then essentially, so kind of sheepishly, and then a couple weeks later, then you get the results,
which
and
are pretty good, I have to say.
Yeah,
for me.
for you, swimmers, strong. So the founder said, "Lao Xie said, okay, what if we can do this? You can do it at home." So you went through the process, but he's like, "What if you just do it at home? With a camera, with your phone camera, right? And so you can do it, and then in 10 minutes, you know whether you're good or not, right?" And so,
But you use your phone camera to get the results.
Correct.
Or you
so basically, it's a few innovations actually here. So one is you do it, you put it on a slide, right? And the liquid there breaks it up. So technically, it breaks it up and amplifies it. The slide is also an innovation. It has to be thin enough so that it's one. How do I say it? It's one spermatozoid per view, so it's not on top of each other,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it has to be good enough where it's like separated out, it's magnified. So then the glass that's sit there has to be good enough where it's magnified for the phone camera, because the phone camera isn't the best microscope, right?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So it has to provide enough amplification, multiplication for the phone camera. And then the phone camera, then the technology, the app has to be good enough to be able to see and use AI to detect the sperm count, and the movement. It really, there's 5 factors really for the golden test, but there's really 2 that really matter. So it's the number,
Yeah.
and then the speed, the motility, like
Yeah.
whether they move or not.
Mobility. Yeah,
whether they
yeah.
move or not. So that's where the AI algorithm comes and judges that, and it gives you a score to say whether your sperm is good or not. And so that's great. We were like, okay, it works. A lot of partnerships and stuff, selling, but we were really thinking about, so I really try to help out to think about their social media campaign and how they grow and how do they make sperm testing great again, right? Because people do have this shy kind of thing, and we think it's not just sperm health. It's not just like, if you want what we want to make it is not just sperm health, right? Because that market is way too small, right? If you're trying to have a child, then you look at it. Otherwise, you don't look at it. What we want to do was actually make it so that every guy would do it, right? Because to be frank, I mean, every guy does it anyway. Every so often, rub one out. You might as well test while you're at it. You see your score. But what we want to do, we can go into this. What we want to do was make it so common so that you do it, you test, and maybe if you're a guy, we then offer you solutions to freeze, right? Right. So you say, look, we wanted to make it so cheap where it's like, for a couple bucks you could freeze it. So your best sperm will happen when you're 20s. It
Mm.
degrades. I mean, for if you compare eggs and sperm is definitely degrades less than eggs, right?
Mhm.
Eggs after a certain point, it's after 35 it starts degrading very quickly. But sperm, it doesn't degrade as quickly, but still a 20-year-old sperm is generally pretty good. So what we want to offer was for men, after you test, you have an ability to freeze your sperm so that when you do have kids, you're able to do it and make it as cheap as a cup of coffee, where it's like a no-brainer to do that. So these are the solutions that we want to provide, because we also notice like males and females are delaying the choice of childbirth later and later.
Is there awareness in the 20s? Because 20s is all about partying.
No, exactly,
dating, so-
exactly. That's what we really want to do. And the next extension of that to promote awareness was actually sperm racing. I don't know if you're starting to see now.
Sperm racing.
Yeah. Yeah, there's basically, I think it's called sperm racing. If you go on Instagram,
Mhm.
there's actually a contest, social media race called sperm racing.
Okay.
Yeah, take a look. And essentially, it's basically it's all fake. So
Mm.
we tried it. We were gonna try it. We're gonna do it for China. Look, there's some part of it which is fake. But to get on a camera and get the sperm to kind of like run a race, it's like a Formula One race, and then you go around a track. You can't really get it to do that. You kind of have to fake some of that. But we were gonna do that. And to promote it, we thought it was gonna be a social media hit because you could do like universities racing against each other. You could do different nationalities, like the Olympics of sperm racing, right? The Germans better than the French, right? And the French better than the English.
For sure.
Right. So there was a huge competitive element around that to raise awareness, and then they would hopefully buy the products and stuff like that.
Funny, we were just talking about the Happy Valley and
right, yeah.
the horse
racing.
racing and betting in Hong Kong.
I mean, it's a fun topic, and we're making jokes about it. But it's actually a very serious topic for a lot of countries. Like we talk South Korea, it's like going down like crazy.
That's right.
In China, it's a big topic. In Germany also.
That's right.
So
it's 100%. I mean, I think the reason why we wanted to come up with all the non-serious stuff is because it's so serious as a subject.
Yeah.
And we're like, it's so serious that
How to address it?
yeah, like it's so serious that it's maybe too serious. So we wanted to make it more open. Why not test your sperm? Like make sperm test just as like common as a blood test, right?
Yeah.
And it's true. Like it is pretty simple. I mean, all guys do it every so often, right? So why not make it fun and simple and promote it, because it is such a serious topic. And to go to the seriousness of it, South Korea is the worst, right? So I think the replacement rate is like 1.2 kids per family. I think that's the replacement rate of how many kids a family should have. And if 1.2 or 1.6, I think if you get below that, that's when you're not replacing the population levels. And Korea is like 0.85 or something, right?
Yeah.
And so all countries will face this issue. And it's not an ideological thing, it's not a race thing. It's because any country that modernizes will inevitably get to that scale, because it's just too expensive to have kids. Way too expensive, right? And parents have to delay that choice later and later because they all want to get set up and have a career, and you have more choices, and you want to travel and stuff. And so that's a really, really important. I don't see that being solved anytime soon, right? It's really impossible. So the only way to do that is to offer more choice technologically for people that have kids, single moms, single dads. You freeze your sperm, do it later, and then again, single moms or single dads, decouple the idea of being married to having a kid. Having a kid and then maybe finding a husband or finding a wife, or not, right? So I think you need to decouple that in order for those fertility rates to come up.
This is not an easy topic. I mean, in Asia, most of the societies are quite traditional, especially in China. Like marriage is still a big thing, and so I think it will take a lot of time to educate everyone to accept this kind of new family concepts, right?
Ironically, I thought the Chinese market was actually our best one.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about you, but I've known more Chinese women that are willing to become single women, single mothers.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. This is definitely.
You know
I
what
don't
I
know
mean?
the numbers,
Yeah.
but I saw.
How many do you know?
Personally, no.
Oh, okay.
I know some in Germany who did it, but yeah, I mean there are so many women who say, okay, I focus on my career, I focus on my own life. I don't have to have a man in my life to be happy. I mostly saw it online, but I mean I know a lot of women in Shanghai and all the big cities.
But I've noticed it, especially in China. They're like, oh yeah, I'm like close to 40, but I really want to have a kid.
Yeah.
I don't care about the man.
Yeah.
But as long as the genes are good, then
yeah.
I've seen a lot. Seen a lot. That's when we realized. I think actually the market is in China. I'm sure it's also in the West as well.
Yeah. But from the thought or from can imagine, I don't know anyone who actually did it. I know one woman in Germany who did it.
Okay.
But so I think it still needs some time, right?
I think so. I mean, it's also like I'm 46, right? So it's my friend circle. So they're 40s.
Yeah.
So they have a career, and then that's when they make that change. If you're a little bit younger, maybe not. And then also like because it's probably the big cities, right? Like the Shanghai, the Beijing, the Shenzhens probably will as well. But I 100% think it's a trend. I think it is going that way. Even Korea is going that way. And look, and it does make sense, right? If you're a girl,
it's good. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're a girl, look, I mean, a husband is different from a father, and if you can decouple that somehow, it's a choice. It's a good choice. So to answer your question, I just thought that actually China, it is, even though there's a lot of tradition for conservative, China to some degree can move pretty fast.
Yeah, I mean it's a big topic and there's no right or wrong, right? Even like we also know like growing up with no father, it's also a big issue for a lot of kids, right? So it's not very easy. So there's no very easy, but like it doesn't mean if you have a husband that you also have a good father, right?
100%.
On the other hand,
100%. Now we're going into the manosphere.
Yeah, so this is
manoverse.
Let's talk some business. So you just,
I can go into that too.
Yeah, very, very complicated. So you just told us that you're actually considering to moving to Shenzhen, moving from Hong Kong to Shenzhen.
Correct,
so well, is this a business decision or
a little bit of both? So my wife and I, we were looking at apartments yesterday in Shenzhen. We were looking in Zhuhai before. So I think a couple of factors. One is it's just the higher quality of life, right, compared to price. Hong Kong is, we live in Hong Kong right now. It's very, very expensive. Shenzhen will get more than double, the value. I think it's also market dynamics in Hong Kong, especially real estate, makes no sense. And so we're paying somebody's rent, but we're getting no, I would say no benefit, but not as much benefit, right? Marginally. And then third, I want my kids to be exposed to China in a meaningful way, right? Not just in Hong Kong, right? That's still very expat-y. In a meaningful way. Look, they're going to be homeschooled, right? So they're English curriculum and stuff. And that's their type. I'm very international. I'm very kind of Western based. But, being able to go out in the city and then have to speak Chinese, it's forced upon you. Everything's around you. I think inevitably they would change and would be more culturally more open to China. And I want that for them. I actually, because I think about my kids a lot and raising kids. I didn't want to steer it towards the manosphere kind of bit, but I do think raising kids, especially in this day and age, is very difficult with social media.
You have your team also then here in how big is your team?
We're distributed. Yeah, so we have some in the UK. So we're distributed anyway, and so UK, Nigeria, Korea. So it's also we're distributed. So in order to make that life work, we need optimize my kids, homeschooling for academic, academics. They have exposure to China by living in China. We have a bigger house, and because my kids are 11 and 7 now, they need more space. So in China, we get more space. Internet connection, then therefore, I was just talking to a friend about how to find my way, and we found a way, right? It's like this very involved process of server directly to the US, right? So bypass actually the VPN, but a server directly to the US. So we've got internet, US based internet, and that way I can work, they can get connectivity, and then I basically just do calls most of the day. But then I'll be close to Shenzhen, where this wonderful podcast is, and then I've got connections there, and then also in Hong Kong, right? So I can go to do meetings in Hong Kong, and then very close to the airports as well when I need to do physical meetings.
So, you were talking about physical AI and all this like application-based AI now. I think it makes total sense to be here in Shenzhen, right? Like, how much do you interact with the robotics companies or AI companies here in Shenzhen, and what's the major difference that you see? Shenzhen ecosystem, tech ecosystem, compared to other areas in China?
To be frank, I don't quite know. That's what I'm quite keen to find out. I mean, I did a podcast with Robo with Tuo to understand kind of what he's trying to build in Robo Valley. I'm trying to learn as well. So I can't compare Shenzhen with the other parts of China. I don't really know, but I do want to know that. I think there's a lot to be there. I think with my fund as well, that's a way to learn, right? Because then I can also fund those startups. We're looking to fund startups in Shenzhen, so that's why in Robo Valley, because that's space and humanoids. That's kind of where it is. Yeah. So I'm really excited to learn and just drink a lot of Luckin coffee.
Awesome. So I think there will be a lot of overlap. We're also thinking of moving to Shenzhen, so I think we will see each other.
You're in Shenzhen
many more times. No, we live in Shanghai.
You guys are thinking about. Right.
We just came here for you.
Oh, right.
No.
Thank you.
So it's a great plan, and we're very excited on what the future will bring to Shenzhen, to Hong Kong, to the whole world, and we're very happy that we're in Asia, where all the change happens.
It's an exciting time right now, I guess.
It is an exciting time. I mean, Europe is great for life sometimes. Holiday? No,
in summer.
Life, is it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't.
For life,
I wouldn't go to Germany for a holiday. I'll go to like southern France.
Never heard somebody who's going to Germany for holidays.
People, mainly Germans are going to Germany for holidays.
Even the Germans go to like Spain for holidays. No one goes. No one's.
Well, there are people still going to Germany. Tech, thank you so much for your insights. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.